I'm so excited to be cranking up the 4 on the floor beat in this episode as we deep dive into the heart of house music. This is Start Here, the podcast from the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, with me, Alexis Ffrench, as we attempt to get under the skin of a genre. I'm a classical pianist, composer and producer and can talk endlessly about those worlds. But what about Britpop, gospel, dubstep? I'm excited to get into all of these genres on this series of Start Here. My guest this episode is the legendary Kwame Safo, aka Funk Butcher, who's been spinning, producing and shaping the UK house scene for over 20 years through his iconic Houseology 101 radio show and label. From Chicago's warehouse roots with pioneers like Frankie Knuckles to today's pulsating global sound, Kwame is here to unpack the soul, the synths, and the stories behind the genre that still packs dance floors worldwide. So, let's drop the needle and get into it. Welcome to the Funk Butcher, aka, or should it be Kwame Safo, aka Funk Butcher? Which way is it? How do you like it? Or are they one and the same? Have they morphed?
They've pretty morphed into one entity at this stage. Yeah.
Kwame, such a pleasure to be in your company. I've been listening to your label, to Houseology. So cool. The music on there is it just gets in your bones, makes me want to dance, which is always a good thing. So, as you probably know, we kick off our show with this elevator pitch, and it can be exactly as you would wish it to be. It can be extensive, or it can be just really short and pithy. So if that's okay with you, over to you. Elevator pitch. Why should people listen to house?
Brilliant. So I believe you should listen to house because from an ethnomusicologist perspective, the roots of house and where it comes from, there is a lot of intersections with other music genres. So I believe when people hear house, they sometimes get a bit frightened and they go, well, this isn't for me and whatnot. But funnily enough, house incorporates so much other popular music genres where there's something for you in the wider world of house. So house isn't specifically one thing. Depending upon the community making that house, it could have elements of African influence, elements of Latin American influence, elements of disco, jazz, R&B, gospel, and you get a really nice melting pot of musicality mixed with that heavy 4/4 rhythm, which makes people dance.
Do you know what? That is so true. I was scrolling the other day. I do that far too often, Kwame. But I was scrolling and watching this guy dance, and he was dancing beautifully, but the music was incredible. So I did what I normally do, is just checked out who it was and what artist, and I went to them on a well-known DSP, and to my surprise, it was on this playlist called House. And this is where categorization is not always helpful, right? Because I consider myself of wide sort of Catholic tastes, eclectic, but I never considered myself as an admirer of house music, probably because of that fall to the floorness that you've just referenced. Yep. But then I listened to this track, and I will look at this person up to find out, to say that it's the most incredible piece of music. So soulful. Yes, it has the fall to the floor. Yeah. But these kind of soulful R&B influences and Latin flavors as well. And so then I downloaded the playlist. I just kept on going up one layer, kind of raising the ante. And so now I would call myself somewhat of a house fan. But I'm also slightly disappointed in myself that I allowed myself to be boxed in and just didn't allow myself to reach out and embrace this incredible. So that's why I'm looking forward to this conversation so much. Not only the opportunity to speak to you, but also just to learn more about this incredible genre. You've already touched on this to a certain degree, and in your incredible elevator pitch, if I may say so. It's up there in the top 10, I've got to say. What makes house so unique, and what sets it apart from other electronic music?
I think... don't want to get myself into trouble here, but I think it's probably the most musical of the electronic music genres. And I'm choosing my words carefully. I'm not trying to look at my notes. But I say that because house is an offshoot of disco. Um, so it takes a lot of its disco roots. Disco was essentially club music of the 60s and 70s, and it was youth music at the time, but also it was youth music which had live instrumentation, can't even say it, instruments in it, and live band players and so on and so forth. And the way house is produced, I guess we can do a deep dive into that in a bit, is it is produced in the same vein as the way hip hop is produced, where you're chopping and cutting and borrowing samples. So you're actually borrowing the live instrumentation, got there in the end, the live drums, all the percussive instruments. So it gives it a fullness sonically. So I would say house has a lot more musicality on it. So you're going to hear a house record which has maybe saxophone in it, which has maybe guitar in it, marimba, xylophone, because of where it's borrowing the influences from. So if it's borrowing from the church and the gospel, you might have an organ in there. If it's borrowing from jazz, you can have clarinet, saxophone, jazz drums in there, and they will be incorporated into the house record.
Yeah.
So it's really good if you are a lover of music, I would say, because you get this entry point into a different genre through the medium of house.
Yeah. No, I get that. And I loved your term earlier about ethnomusicology as well. And you've referenced their sample and hip hop. And shall we say, not derivative, but certainly influenced by all these other styles of music. And I think that's a theme which I think we might wish to return to. I love the fact that you referenced disco as well, because in many of the episodes I've done in this series, disco has been foundational. And talking of foundational and musicality, I couldn't not mention Frankie Knuckles. And I wonder if you could just expand on who he is, what he did, what the warehouse, where it all began, so we can just have a sort of foundational pyramid to our conversation.
So you've got the warehouse, as you just mentioned, and the warehouse is the birthplace of house and where it gets its name house from. It's just a abbreviation of the term warehouse, and that is in Chicago. And what you have there is a collection of Black and Latino gay community coming together, building a quote unquote safe space for them to enjoy music, which isn't classed as house yet.
No, was it disco then?
Yeah, and I think it's really something which I try and if I do get the opportunity to talk about DJing and music genres, I really like to articulate what is happening at the beginning.
Yeah.
There's this amalgamation of sounds borrowed from different places, and it hasn't been given a name yet. It's the style of that club or that DJ or that residency. And then over a point of time, I guess the audience or the journalist at the time will give it an umbrella term. But it would have been the popular disco records. It would have been the popular elements which would have later be defined as house.
Yeah.
And it's the repetition of that which builds the tapestry, and then you get the kind of the scenes we have today. So Frankie Knuckles would have been that person in Chicago building that landscape, that infrastructure of what house becomes known as.
Yes.
At the same time, roughly around the same time, you've got Larry Levan in New York doing the same thing at the Garage. So the Garage was a similar club where he was playing his own style and building up his own repertoire and collection of records which shaped that. And those two were very close. They were good friends, so they had an awareness of each other's records, and you would have this synergy where it wasn't a scene developed in isolation. Some records you might hear in New York, some records you might hear in Chicago. So you're having this really strong, robust scene developing in across the East Coast.
So Marshall Jefferson, Ron Hardy, I've been seeing some of these names recurring, and The Summer of Love. Can you tell us about the pivotal track of that time?
I think the track which obviously leaps out to people the most is "Move Your Body" by Marshall Jefferson. That was probably the main breakout track from the Chicago house scene, and obviously had its very recognizable piano riff in there, which is just a hit. It was one of the first house records which obviously crossed over to the UK and got UK popularity in the I believe it was called the Summer of Love. There was a period of time when around 88 when this sound had migrated over and was brought over to the UK ears, and that's obviously the birthplace of how Europe gets to hear this sound via the UK illegal raves and so on and so forth. But you've got this real sort of richness, and again, that was incorporating piano, and that was the first sort of iteration of piano house and piano keys getting incorporated into that electronic music, which I guess up until that point in time, when you've got scenes sort of like electro happening on the West Coast, this stuff was a little bit more musical and almost less industrial than sort of the hard techno sounds and the electro sounds. So you had something which is more musical, more akin to the people who were fans of disco, that they can kind of like transition into what house was presenting for them.
It's interesting the kind of different instrumentations and I guess the different configurations and how they might lend themselves to different audiences, different styles, different songs. How did that transition into to piano-led house? How did that come about? Were there pivotal musicians? You've mentioned some of the DJ. Were there pivotal musicians of that style who were able to push that forward?
Because a lot of the DJs, they were DJs at the time, so they were, and I think that was interesting because it was a DJ-led industry as opposed to musician-led.
Got it. So these were samples and...
These were samples, but these are also people who had an idea and understand of musicality, but they weren't formally trained. So they would sort of navigate their way through keys. And I think if you were to fast forward to today, house music and electronic music has probably got the most appeal to young audiences because of its entry point. Its entry point is a lot more accommodating for people who don't have a fundamental firm grasp of music theory and so on and so forth. But when Marshall Jefferson is talking about how he just feed his way through the keys and borrow equipment from his friends and create some of these records, it's because it's coming from a very underrepresented and low socioeconomic group, making do with what is available to them, in the same way that hip hop was, where they're doing the same thing. They're finding the breaks in the records, just flipping it and taking their old parents' records of jazz and finding those James Brown breaks and so on and so forth. Similar, So
relying on their oral perception and their advanced listening skills to bring great music to the fore. You mentioned disco and LGBTQ plus communities. How important were those safe spaces within Black communities in particular to bring this music through?
I think they were important because it was it's what happens when you, to some degree, where you push or apply a pressure on a specific community and something great happens from it. So the disadvantage, which was turned into, I guess, a cultural advantage of not being allowed into certain spaces, not being allowed to contribute in the mainstream areas, meant that you had this group of outliers and outcasts forming their own communities and scenes, not just on a rave basis, but from a sonic basis. So this very hypnotic, rhythmic genre was getting built in isolation from mainstream. And I guess what's been happening time and time again is anything which has happened on the fringes and on the outside eventually becomes cool anyway. So it needed that incubation point away from mainstream to kind of build up the momentum of, oh, what's going on over there? I want to see what they're doing. I want a piece of that pie. So by the time, I think there's some videos online where news reporters are going to the warehouse to check it out and seeing what the hell Frankie Knuckles is doing over there. It's because it's built this momentum in isolation. I think if it have had a relationship with the mainstream early on, it probably wouldn't have built this reputation it has now. It wouldn't have been seen as cool enough. Yeah,
that's really interesting. The second Summer of Love. I think we're talking 1988. I was there. I remember it well. So tell us about that period in the UK and acid house raves, and is that the point at which house music truly went mainstream, or is there more to it? Am I missing the point entirely?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say that is the main point. I think it's probably the main inflection point from a UK perspective. Some might see it as when it hits the Balearic Islands, or even when it hits part of Central Europe and Germany and kind of morphs into techno and so on and so forth. But from a UK perspective, I would say it hit in working class communities, black and white and brown, in the fields, and allowing people who don't have the capacity to rave in the swanky clubs in the swanky areas, allowing them the ability to access it. I think that was a changing point. And I guess you can kind of link it to the response of the press. The media at the time, they were kind of onto it. This is awful. And you can almost, when that happens, you kind of can gauge that you're onto something here. Because so the youth setting up systems, being rebellious and saying this is all we want to hear. And it's when you talk to people who were present, who were contributing at the time, they always speak about the unity was something that they'd never seen before. So you kind of moving through a point of the UK where it's incredibly divided across political lines, racial lines, and so on and so forth. And then you've got these raves where you can find everyone at. And that was it's something very, very powerful, which I personally would stick my neck out and say I don't think another music genre has had that effect, in my opinion. You just drop the record in, no mass marketing or media or advertising to kind of go, hey, this is for you, hey, this is for you. It was almost just a very organic pull to put these people together. So I think doing that is an important, like I said, inflection point, because those different communities that came, they raved in the fields, then they went back to their own communities, and then they made their own sort of variations of their styles of house. So house, which was, if you were predominantly from white British working class, it would sound a certain way. If you were black, it would kind of morph into the UK garage, and the Asian community bringing their house back to their community. So everyone sort of met up, took the parts that they like, and then went back to their respective communities. And so
interesting. Another name from that time, hacienda.
Yes.
We're talking Manchester, aren't we?
Yeah.
Is that a name, hacienda? Tell us about that. Is that a name that you consider to be synonymous with house and the house movement?
Definitely. I think, contrary to popular belief, house music didn't start in London, and London was probably one of the last places to kind of experience the house fever, as it were, because it kind of moved down the UK from the north, which is why you've got people like a guy called Gerald who's from Manchester, producing Voodoo Ray in and around that time. Hacienda was a popular night spot from a much more of a the commercial end of Manchester finding a space to rave. But again, there's some beautiful footage online of carnivals in Manchester, or parties in Manchester, or people raving to house music at that time because of how it was incorporated into communities. So it came in through the sound systems. So the Windrush generation, which were obviously playing your reggae and other Caribbean influenced music, some of those sounds that were very eclectic would play the latest US import, whether it's from Underground Resistance or Marshall Jefferson or so on and so forth. So you're getting little pockets of house and techno being infiltrated into, which is why we have the jungle and the drum and bass within the black communities. It's those specific sound systems who were cavalier enough to kind of fling that on in the dance and then look for the reaction. Okay, I'll play a few more next time around. And then that's coming down from Leeds, Manchester, before you get to London.
Now we're getting into a segment of the conversation that I've been looking forward to, and there's the kind of muso bit. Well, I tell you what. Well, let's do the musical tenets of house first of all. So those raw component parts. Again, we have touched on this to a degree, but the bass elements, BASE rather than the BASS elements that a house track needs to have in order to be considered as such. And perhaps then we might gravitate towards the production element, which I'm particularly keen to explore. So musical tenets, what are we talking about here? What would you expect to hear in a purist's house track?
So I guess a purist house track, which you would define as a Chicago house record, it's got a very strong spine. It's that kick running down the center of the track is very defined, it's very prominent. The reason why I say that is because there are some records across all music genres where the kick isn't as evident. There's a lot of records which have the kick is there, but it's whether or not the person is punching it through in the mix, or whether it's supposed to sit within and the rest of the percussive instruments sort of engulf it. So house has got a very, almost like if you were to look at it like an animal, it's like the Stegosaurus. The plates of a Stegosaurus, that's the kick sort of running all the way down the spine of the animal. And around that, you've got your snares and your hi-hats. And the snares and your hi-hats give you the creativity to kind of give you that shuffle, that groove, alongst that rigid structure. And even when you speak to some of the guys of the UK who were around the foundation of jungle, and then they first heard house as it came in through acid house and that era, they relate that drum, the monotony, the hypnotic nature of that drum, they relate it quite strongly to Africa.
Interesting.
Which is what I find. So where house was played in the black communities, and you've got artists such as a guy called Gerald and interpreting their acid house variation in the UK. Some of the jungle, which is coming off the back of that as well, is a lot of them felt that they got the term jungle because of their relationship to the motherland and Africa, and there was almost this the calling element of it. And obviously the drum itself is very central in African music as well, just as a mechanism of communication and talking. So not to deviate too much, but when you kind of hear people speaking about the spiritual nature of house music, a lot of it is in relation to that drum, the power of the drum. And obviously, again, I'm not no scientist in it, but I do believe there's some sort of frequency regarding the tempo, the BPM of house music, which is kind of around 119 to 124 beats per minute, and the drum elements and how that resonates with the human in the club environment. So you got your house, you've got your kick, you've got your snare, you got your hi-hats, and then you've got this melody element in it. And the melody from a, I guess, a pure perspective would be piano, and then it's incorporated other elements of jazz as well. So deep house as a label towards the early part of the 2010s
Yeah.
was any sort of house music which had jazz influences, jazz elements in it, and it was taking your Coltrane and other well-known sort of felonious and incorporating, just taking little snippets, flipping it in the same way that was happening in classic hip hop records. So when you look at a classic Pete Rock record and the Pete Rock style of production, taking oh god, it escapes me now, the jazz flip that he done for Nas, "The World Is Yours."
Yeah.
It's in the same vein of production that would be happening in house kind of thing if they weren't doing the live keys over it.
Yeah.
But house production is very simplistic. It isn't as, I would say, complicated as disco. As you move through the stages and you've got your bridge section and the
Structurally. Yeah.
yeah, structurally. So there isn't automatically a change. You will have a bridge section in house. It might be the breakdown element, but it is very monotonous because it has a function to make people dance and keep people in a rhythm and a momentum.
How important may seem like an obvious question, but how important are vocals in house music? And is there an approach that you think has worked, has worked really well for mass audiences, or is there a particular singer who is revered and wanted on a lot of the contemporary house records? Tell us about vocals.
I think vocals are such an incredible and important part of house music, especially if you're looking at the house records which were carrying that disco energy, those songs, those almost like early R&B style, it wasn't called that at the time, into that electronic music space. And the black women that actually carried that sound sonically into both underground and pop culture spaces. I think the way vocals have been used by producers and DJs is probably the most creative I've seen, because they're either used as like the main focal point of a record in the same way we'd see it in mainstream spaces, or they're used as like another layer of instrumentation. So this whole thing which came about with the dub mix, where you're actually chopping up parts of that vocal record in the session and making a complete whole new record, which sometimes is more popular than the main mix.
Wow.
And you found a lot of that happening, from my opinion, in the New York side of the scene. There are dub mixes and which were put on the vinyl to sort of complement the main mix if you wanted something a bit stripped back and even more rhythmic, but using that element of vocal in there. So it's incredibly important because that vocal is actually adding a layer of melody, and in some and the reason why, again, from a production space, for any producers out there, if you aren't great at keys or traditional music theory, having an amazing vocalist could provide you the melody that you need to carry your record along. Their singing, their vocals can actually provide that melody layer, that top line. And you find that when you listen to some traditional dub mixers or even like New York house records, there'll be the drums, and then there won't be like a layer of keys or melody, which traditionally the vocalist would follow and sing towards.
Yeah.
They're actually creating their own melody as a bed, and those two are just resonating, and that's enough. So it's a very creative way. And the thing I always like to say is that the dance floor is the most democratic space there is. if it works out there, then it's working. And sometimes we can kind of get overcomplicated and in our heads about, oh, it needs this, it needs that. Well, try it out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
try.
You've referenced music theory a couple of times, and I'm really interested. This is an ABRSM podcast, after all, grade 5 music theory and all that. What are your feelings about theory? Would you like to have you worked with young musicians, aspiring DJs, who have looked to perhaps develop their musicianship, who haven't perhaps had the advantage of a classical traditional music education? And if so, how have you developed their skills with them? What have you advised them to do, whether it be textural, melodic, beat-led, etc.? And what would you like to see more of in the traditional music theory space? That's the second part of that question.
Oh, okay. I think I'd like to answer that second part because I think it just resonated with me first. Yeah, and I think I would like to see those who have a fundamental grasp of music theory, the foundation, where it begins, where it ends, their restrictions, and then expand beyond that. I think that will be really exciting in this because I think when you come at it from different worlds where someone who has the theoretical space of, okay, there are so many chords, there are so many chord progressions and so on and so forth, and working with someone who completely is a blank slate, the alchemy of worlds that they can tap into is really beautiful because someone can inform the other one, and where someone sees discordance, someone doesn't, and they see this is actually a frequency which is actually pleasant to the ear. We've tried and tested it, and how would music compositions look like if you incorporated some of this um how can I put it, unconventional styles into more music compositions from that space. So I think that's something I'm really waiting to kind of see a deliberate attempt to say, okay, I'm musically trained from this perspective, but what I'm about to do is venture into this space of and not labeling it as an experimental, labeling it as this is house music, but using these tenets of house which aren't traditionally seen as canon in the music theory space. Yeah,
interesting. And let's talk about the cultural DNA of house. And you reference Africa earlier on. Terms like, am I right in saying Amapiano?
Yeah, Amapiano. Yeah,
Amapiano, Afro House. Can you take us through all of those terms and connotations and the whole sort of cultural DNA?
Yeah. So I mean, I just came back from South Africa last year, October, and it's an absolutely incredible place, and it doesn't surprise me why house has been so popular there. In the landscape, in the political landscape, if you were to look across the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa's probably got the most evident history of struggle and oppression. So for the people there to pick a genre sonically which is advocating for joy, dancing, resistance through movement, it doesn't surprise me. Like everyone in that country can dance, and I mean dance really, really well. And I think I'm always interested in how there is a socio-political context in how most of these music genres are created, and not even just created, how they spread like wildfire. So I believe that is probably a reason why pop music in South Africa is house music. It's not it's just undeniable. So
Wow.
yes, they've got strong hip hop and other genres within the kind of the portfolio of music, but by far and large, Afro and Amapiano, because they're slightly different sonically. Um, they're the most popular genres.
Hmm. And are you there in the court? I'm interested in your work, 'cause your biog, and obviously your achievements, and the scope of your work is absolutely fascinating. Were you there advocating for black music within the context of your work back at home? Are you happy to talk to us about that?
Oh
Because
yeah, yeah,
I find
sure.
I find that really fascinating.
Thank you. So I've set up an organization called Black Mix, which is the UK's first black music export office. And with that expertise as a DJ producer and now working within the arena of music export, it's part of my remit to understand what are the metrics of success across black music genres, not just in the UK but internationally. And I at times get invited in my British Council capacity to go out to different conferences and speak, bringing my expertise to the British Council as well. So I was in there in a capacity scoping,
Mm.
understanding what are popular music genres, what are the parts of the infrastructure which are missing in that country, which are which we could learn from or which we could help with, and vice versa. And using that information, traveling a little bit to build up a bigger picture as to where there's demand for specific black music genres, who needs to be paired with who geographically, where there is of quote unquote UK benefit to the UK economy on these relationships. And yeah, funny enough, that's me being creative in a different element of my career.
So we've covered so much, haven't we? You touched on Balearics earlier. How did the Balearics influence the global rave and clubbing scene?
Whew. It's so I guess the issue. Okay, I'll use the word issue. Is that sadly, and I guess it's come back to my music export work, which is tied into identifying what is of cultural value. Unfortunately, at the time where Chicago and New York were producing this sound, they didn't understand the fundamental cultural value of what it is they were making. And I think this is still something that we're dealing with in Black Mix, of how to use language which makes people understand tangible and intangible cultural value. Because sometimes we can just do it so effortlessly. It's, oh, okay, I've made a new dance, whatever, whatnot. And creating mechanisms where people understand intellectual property
So important.
and how even now intellectual property can be leveraged for as collateral to get money from banks. That's what the conversation we're moving into. So coming back to your Balearics question, as it left the United States, and even when you talk to some of the legends in the game, your Marshall Jeffersons, your Frankie Knuckles, and DJ Pierre's, a lot of them were baffled and confused about what was happening. Why is there such a demand in these parts of the world? And they went and they did their bookings, and as their bookings were in the UK and in Germany and Ibiza, those places understood the cultural value and the impact of these sounds and how it could fund hospitality, whole hospitality sectors, keep the lights on in venues for like 30, 40, 50 years kind of thing. And now we're in a space where you've got the UK government, it talks about its creative industry sector plan, and just creativity and the creative industries is much more prevalent in political conversations as a mechanism to grow economies. the I guess the parts which drew and attracted that house music energy, which made Ibiza this powerhouse, which made Berlin the powerhouse of techno, as it were, kind of thing. They understood it sooner than the groups who made it. Yeah.
It's such interesting work that you do. It's just so rich and multi-layered, and it's just been such a blast to speak to you today.
Thank you. Likewise.
I couldn't let you go though without asking you for your recommendations for house music. So there's people listening. They're listening to the conversation. They want to know. They're keen. They're eager. That you've lit their fire. Where can they start their house journey? Perhaps 3 listening points.
Okay. Ooh, I'm going to give you some names. I would say check out Masters at Work. Absolutely, check out Masters at Work and the bit which is really fun about house music is that a lot of house producers produce under pseudonyms. So check out the different pseudonyms that these house music producers have produced under. So Masters at Work, shout out to Louis Vega, Kenny Dope. Listen to Todd Terry. Todd Terry stuff has got hip hop influences as well.
Yeah.
So if you are akin to more like 90s New York hip hop, you will understand that sort of collage, cut and paste style of his production. DJ Pierre, his acid house, incorporating a Roland 303 instrument there. That's kind of got that real nice distorted wobble effect in there, kind of thing. And then go to the classics, your Frankie Knuckles, your Marshall Jeffersons. So some of the people I would mention as well is like Charisma, who's a great DJ, and he's got his own sort of unique spin on how he incorporates his production style, especially when you think you've heard it all. And DJ Paulette, which is quite poignant because hailing from Manchester, she's played the Hacienda, and he's got a really, really, really strong and beautiful history regards to house music and where she's taken it around the world. So
DJ Paulette.
Yeah.
Awesome. There's so many names. They're in here, Kwame, and I'm going to do some deep diving later on. I just occurred to me though, I referenced an act that I saw on Insta, didn't I, at the beginning of this conversation? And I didn't have the name to hand, and I just feel I need to share this. I feel I need to share this information because I was so struck in this moment. Jordi Cabrera.
Okay.
Jordi Cabrera.
Sounds familiar.
I was
From
hoping
South Africa?
I was hoping for more of a response there, to be totally honest with you. I thought we were going to, not Jordi Cabrera. I was like, oh my gosh. But who is Jordi Cabrera? And that was, so it's this track I was hearing from, and I've set up, so much is my admiration for this artist. I've set up an actual Jordi Cabrera radio because I just love this track and this artist so much. Just absolutely awesome. So I'm just going to put, I'm not an expert, but I'm just a lay enthusiast on house music, and I'd just like to chuck that in there as to just an addendum of sorts,
okay,
to your esteemed list. But that's something that I really, really love. But listen, Kwame, such a joy to speak to you today. Or should I say Kwame, aka Funk Butcher? I love that name. It's just, it implies all sorts of things, but there's just like a subtle threat of violence which runs underneath it, which is just like this kind of, I come with house and the threat of violence. It's brilliant. It's such a blast to speak to you today, Kwame.
You too.
Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you so much for listening to Start Here, which is brought to you by the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music. If you liked today's episode, why not go back and check out the other 2 series of Start Here? If you like house, you might enjoy our episodes on dubstep, garage, and experimental. Follow ABRSM on TikTok and Instagram and tell us what genre you want to be unpacked next.